Hey everybody, we filmed today's episode here in Maui, and so I did not try to edit out the sound of the waves. We left them in. I hope they bring you a little joy and relaxation as we tell you about the most stressful year in our history.
Well, Rick, we're definitely not in the volcano lair, aka the Bat Cave, neither one of us.
No, but I'm near a lot of
Many miles
volcanic
away.
rock, actually. I'm in Maui, and that behind me there you can see these beautiful volcanic cliffs. It's a little different vibe today.
Rick is in Maui, and I am on Bald Head Island, North Carolina. So we are probably about 5,000 miles apart, but we just could not wait to record another podcast episode because we just dropped 2 epic episodes over the last few weeks with a rebutting John Oliver. I don't know, Rick, you have got any feedback or any thoughts on those 2 episodes?
No, it felt pretty good to set the record straight. So, all right, let's get back into the history. But first, let us boldly go.
Risk. The final frontier. These are the stories of the Axon enterprise. Our mission to protect life, to seek amazing people, and live epic tales. Come, let us boldly go.
Welcome to episode 13 of the Boldly Go podcast. As Rick mentioned, we set the record straight during episode 11 and episode 12. Today's episode, again, we're not in the volcano lair, aka the Bat Cave. We are both in separate locations, and we're going to see how this works. Obviously, Rick's got a beautiful background behind him in Maui, and I'm here on an island off the coast of North Carolina. So let's see how this goes. Rick, I think when we left off, going through the history of TASER, I believe we were nearing the end of 2004 and heading into 2005, and some pretty significant things happened. Why don't you start us off there?
So to give you the quick recap, 2004 was the year that all hell broke loose with a series of well-coordinated, it appeared, negative press campaign against us, starting with Wyatt Andrews at CBS in April, big negative story. Then that led into Alex Berenson, front page of the New York Times, very negative story on July 18th. Then the Department of Defense released its big research study finding tasers generally safe and effective. The insiders who had not sold for like 9 months or so, actually almost a year at that point, all the insiders then sold some stock thinking we were out of the woods. And then Alex Berenson from the New York Times comes back with a really negative piece in November of 2004, basically alleging stock fraud, that we lied to drive up the stock price, and then insiders pumped up the stock and then sold. And so I think that is probably what triggered the ultimate SEC investigation, which we found about on Christmas Eve. On December 24th, we got the notice, and then we get into early 2005 when my brother Tom gets a call from the Arizona Republic asking us, hey, what about this SEC inquiry? At which point, we then actually had to, we determined it was better for us to get ahead of it and disclose it and not, wait for the Arizona Republic. So we put out our own press release.
Yeah, I think I've gotten a lot of comments prior episodes waiting to hear what happened. I think when we left off, Tom had gotten that call, and we had dropped some other episodes in between this, Dr. Kroll and Dr. Ho, and obviously the John Oliver episodes. But I've had many people saying, "What happened?" They're waiting to hear the rest of the story.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give a little more context. So you'll also recall there was this firm, Gradient Analytics, we talked about, that wrote a research paper, a research report on us, giving us an F in financial performance the quarter after we made 54% operating income, which was clearly a paid hit piece. And later, Gradient Analytics analysts would, under oath, testify that indeed they were paid by short sellers. Again, those are people who make money when the stock goes down. That Gradient Analytics was selling hit pieces on companies to manipulate the stock price and drive it down. So one thing that was unique when we first hired Wilson Sonsini, which was the big law firm up in Silicon Valley, to help with our SEC investigation, The SEC inquiry into us had two elements. One was the allegations that we lied about the safety of the TASER to drive up the stock price. The other allegation was that we had misaccounted for a big order. So we had a large order that came in from one of our big distributors. And Gradient Analytics, one of their allegations was that we shouldn't be able to take that as revenue, because they alleged that it was a new product, and therefore we didn't know if it was going to sell through. This is called revenue recognition, and it is a hot button because guys like Enron would recognize orders that weren't really orders. But in this case, it was really clear. Like, as our head of sales used to say, this isn't the library. We made a sale. Yes, it was a new product, but there was no right of return. The customer paid us for it. It was a clear sale. But what was unique was that the SEC sent us their letter in December. We had not yet closed the quarter, meaning, we had not reported any of these orders to the public yet. And the lawyers told us they had never seen the SEC investigate the accounting for an order that has not been accounted for yet. Meaning we hadn't done the accounting to close the quarter. It was in the active quarter. So this was a very aggressive move.
You got the letter on December 24th. The quarter would have closed on December 31st, and then you would have to close the books for the quarter and for the year.
Right, and it's during that process that you determine, okay, what orders count as revenue, which ones do we push out into the future? So the fact we were getting a government investigation that included accounting that wasn't done yet was very abnormal. Okay, so that gets us to sort of caught up. Now, I think I remember telling you my dad was saying, Rick, I think we have a mole inside the company, and I think we've got a short attack coming after us. And I kept telling him, Dad, I think you're being a little bit paranoid. But it turns out he wasn't paranoid.
I mean, if someone told me that, I would have probably said, I would have been like, you're off your rocker. Like, you've been reading or watching too many movies. I don't know. I probably would have said the same thing. There's no way that you would think that there was a mole inside the company.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
So here's how we found out.
But your dad did.
He had the right instinct. Now, we'll remember Alex Berenson, our friend at the New York Times. He's now written several very negative, inflammatory hit pieces on us. The last one in November, I was really upset about because he kept telling the world how dangerous tasers were, and yet he had chosen to take a voluntary exposure. He himself got hit with one, right? I think that tells you a lot right there. If they're so dangerous, you probably wouldn't take a hit yourself. And he did not disclose that in his article that he wrote immediately afterwards. So of course we put out a press release calling him out on that. So there's one more piece of information to share here, and that is after Alex Berenson's November blockbuster, where he accused us of essentially of stock fraud, Mark Kroll was, like all of us, curious what was going on here, and so he started doing some research on Alex Berenson to learn what motivates this guy, and he found an article in PR Week magazine, and in that article it was doing a profile, and apparently Alex Berenson talked about the fact he played in a regular poker game with a bunch of hedge fund managers in New York. Now, hedge funds are exactly the people, and some hedge funds specialize in short selling and doing these sort of investigations and short attacks. And so, as we were preparing to write a letter to the New York Times, our general counsel, Doug Clint, got the New York Times handbook, and lo and behold, in there it says that their reporters must avoid any whiff of bias. For example, playing in a regular card game with people who may profit from your stories.
Wait.
Basically,
It actually gave the example of playing in a card game.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. And we're like, my Lord, this is the example of a potential source of bias. And so we wrote a letter to the New York Times, a complaint, saying, look, we'd like you to look into this. We'd like to investigate. We think Alex Berenson, his stories are so biased, and he clearly has a relationship with people who might profit if our stock drops. And we thought it might take a while for the New York Times to go do an investigation, but we got a letter back like 2 weeks later saying, well, we've looked into it. There's no big deal.
Oh.
All right. But now this is all... Go ahead.
We investigated ourselves and we cleared our own guy.
Yeah, in like 10 days. And that include mail going out and whatever.
Right. It's not sending an email. This is the old-fashioned way.
Well, we probably did send it by email as well. But regardless, it was pretty quick. Now, here's where things get interesting. So now we roll forward, right? We get the call from Arizona Republic about this SEC investigation. So, we called the SEC. They basically said, hey, we didn't leak it. So we're pretty confident we have an internal leaker. Or somebody's going through our trash, or there's something going on where somebody told the Arizona Republic. So we get ahead of it. We put out our press release saying, hey, we're under investigation. The next day, a New York Times story hits. And the New York Times story says, not only is TASER under investigation over these safety issues, but a New York Times investigation has uncovered, we think that they were inflating their sales. And their piece of evidence for this was they got an internal company document that was a purchase order that was given to the New York Times. But what was interesting is the New York Times said, we received this document from someone who will profit if the company's stock drops. So we're like, wait a minute, we just alleged that Alex Berenson was working with short sellers. The New York Times said he wasn't, but now he puts a disclaimer in his next article, saying, yes, I'm getting sources, I'm getting information from short sellers. And not only am I getting it from someone who'll profit if the stock drops, a short seller, but that short seller had access to internal company documents.
I know our podcast is super popular, but this is literally like a Netflix special here. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Billions, which is about a hedge fund and short selling. This could literally be an episode on the show Billions.
Oh, just wait, it gets better. Okay, so now, as this is happening, my dad is pounding the table. See, I told you, son, we've got a mole. And I said, Dad, this doesn't prove we have a mole. Somebody could be dumpster diving, going through our trash. We maybe haven't had the best hygiene about always shredding documents or making sure. Right. So I never want to believe ill of people.
I think I would have been on your dad's. I think I've been on your dad's side once somebody had the PO.
Okay. Now I'm going to go into what seems at first like a meaningless detail. So in the New York Times article, they said, a New York Times investigation found that they were pumping up their sales. A December 30th purchase order for $2 million came from their distributor in Florida. And on it said, hope this helps, with 5 exclamation points. Now, I think their allegation is that we were arm twisting people. Hey, you got to take this order. That's the implication. Right. It's the end of the quarter. And that guy writes, hope this helps. But now our chief financial officer goes and pulls the purchase order out of our files, and nowhere does it say, hope this helps. But luckily, my brother Tom, the minute that article hit, he was online downloading from our fax server, and there he saw the original document, and it said, hope this helps. So now we're like, wait a minute, what's going on? Somebody altered the document that was left behind, because the one that's in our files, that has been erased. And it was our then chief financial officer who came up with the only theory ever that makes any sense. So look, somebody took that purchase order, faxed it, or sent it somehow to this short seller in New York, and then altered the document left behind, whited it out, and then made a copy where that handwritten statement was removed. And when we compared the two documents, you could actually see in their haste, they had missed one of the tips of one of the exclamation points. So yes, you could see a little piece of the handwritten note, but most of it was gone.
So the handwritten note wasn't to you guys.
No, it was. It was. So here's what we think happened. All right. That purchase order came from our largest distributor at the time, a guy named Russ Stender out of Florida. And Russ had a lot of personality. And Russ was the type of guy who would say things like, he'd kind of beat his chest. Hey, I know this is a big order. Hope this helps. Right? Very, very in character. So what we think was happening was whoever sent the document to the short seller and altered the one left behind was setting a trap for management. Because back then, Mike, this might be hard to believe, I wasn't as mature as I am now. Back then, I was more pugnacious, and anytime Alex Barrington would write something about us, I would go on CNBC with Jim Cramer, for example, when he said there weren't enough safety studies. I would show up with stacks of safety studies. We believe somebody was setting us up for me to go on TV and say, look, this purchase order doesn't say, hope this helps. This is inflammatory. Then they would go get the original document from the guy who sent it to us, from Russ Stender, and now the story would be, in the face of all these investigations, management is altering documents, which that would have been the story. Now, it doesn't matter that it's a handwritten note that's essentially, in my belief, meaningless. We were being set up by somebody inside the company. And that's when I realized, oh my God, Dad, you're right.
He was right.
Because this couldn't have been somebody who found a document in the trash. This was somebody who intercepted it between the fax machine and our financial records.
But this is wild.
It is pretty hard to believe. All right, so now I'm like, oh shit, this is an insider. My dad's right. We've got somebody inside the company. And so now we went out and we hired a private investigation firm to come and to do a formal investigation because, we don't have any experience in this. And I think we hired a couple
of
different
but
firms.
wait, hold on. But just wait a second now. I mean, this is obviously just crazy, wild looking back. But at the time, I'm sure it's just like, but did you suspect people before you hired the investigators? Were you guys, your dad, you, Tom, were you sitting around like you had some idea, or you were accusing people, or you're like, nope, let's get the investigators in here?
We had no idea. In fact, I still couldn't believe that somebody, we were a relatively small company. We had 20, 30 people in the front office. Now, let's park that for a second. So now we know we've got a mole. We were hiring an investigator. The stock price is cratering. It goes from $33 a share rapidly down to $7. Oof. Now, right in the middle of all this, and you feel like you're in a bunker and there's bombs coming at you left and right. We're under federal investigation. Our stock is now dropping. Our customers are calling us in a panic. They're canceling pending orders. And as I said before, the previous year, our customers didn't care about the negative press. They were like, hey, we get negative news articles too. But what they did care about was when you're under federal investigation, we're a police department. We can't buy from you. That's right. Okay, so all this stuff is breaking loose. And so we go out to lunch for a break with me and Tom and Kathy Hanrahan, our CFO, our chief, I think our chief operating officer at the time, and Dan Barrett. And as we're coming back exhausted, like nobody has slept, in our parking lot, I'm walking up to the front door, and there is Max Nerheim, who is, our chief inventor, the guy who invented the X26. And he is red-faced. He's in a yelling match with our patent attorney. And I'm thinking, this is odd. Something's wrong. And so I walk up and I go, hey guys, what's up? And our patent attorney is this guy named Tom. So Max is sitting there talking to Tom, and Max is incoherent. He is so angry. I can't understand what he's saying. And I look at Tom Watkins, and he's also very upset, the patent attorney. And Tom looks at me and he says, hey Rick, there's something I've got to tell you. I invented the X26, not Max. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm confused. And then he tells me this story. He says, yes, I've been wanting to tell you for years, but now that it's all come to a head, I have to tell you, I am the inventor of the X26. And I look at Max, and Max is just flabbergasted. And long story short, Tom wanted $10 million, or he was going to go to the patent office because he's our attorney, which he ultimately did. And he put his name on the patent, swapped it out, and said, I'm the inventor. And he basically effectively stole our patent out from under our noses. Now, this was the low point where I'm thinking, okay, we have a mole internally who's helping short sellers. And now when we're down and we're getting punched in the gut, our own attorney comes back and effectively tries to do what I believe was blackmail. He basically wanted $10 million, or he was going to undermine our most valuable intellectual property and potentially try to take it from the company to either sell it back to us or, basically he was taking our most valuable patent. It was crazy.
Extortion. Okay, hold on. Let's pause for 1 second here. Like, let's let this sink in for one more second. Like, that is, when you kept saying it, it gets, you're not going to believe this. Like, it becomes even more unbelievable. So all of this is going on. SEC investigation, New York Times article, the guy's playing with a poker with hedge fund managers who are shorting the stock's in the tank. You guys go to lunch, and all of this is happening. And now someone, your patent lawyer, is trying to blackmail you. I mean, trying to get $10 million out of it. Saying, now, did he file the patent? He'd already filed the patent under his name?
He'd already filed it with Max as the inventor. Now, again, I want to be careful because this is a public broadcast. Like, I don't know if we can call it extortion. That's like a legal, definition, and I want to be careful. But it sure felt, well, it may have been, I don't know. It felt deeply wrong. Our own patent attorney was turning against us to claim that he had invented and should own our patent, which ultimately, so I had to go to my board of directors, as you can imagine. Hey guys, here we are, we're under attack, the stock is down, and oh, by the way, our core intellectual property is at risk. Should we negotiate with this guy? The 10 million was the opening offer. And look, one of the rational things to do would be, when you're in this much trouble, you can't have a war on multiple fronts. But I said, it just feels wrong. And whenever we've dug in and done what we believe is the right thing, it always works out. And so the board agreed with me, and we said, there's no way that we're going to stand for this. And so we said no. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and let you know how that played out.
It actually, by the way, I'm just trying to, I can picture Max being incoherent in the parking lot as you guys walk. I just saw Max in the office just the other day. Like, first of all, I would not want to be on the other side of that, but I could see Max just going ballistic, finding something, finding something out like this.
Yeah. So, this was going to be messy. Inventorship is a he said, she said kind of thing. Now, the patent in question was the X26, and I think we talked about in a previous episode, the thing that made the X26 so effective was that it was a two-part electrical pulse. It would hit with a high voltage to bridge across the gap, jump through the clothing, and then we'd lower the voltage to deliver the rest of the current. And that's what made it like 80% more efficient and smaller than the M26. So I remember when we were explaining this to our patent attorney years before this, there was a moment where he was trying to understand it, and he said, oh, wait a minute. This is similar to how strobe lights work. Because sometimes strobe lights, like on airplanes, the strobe light also wants to be efficient, and they have a thing where sometimes a strobe light will hit with a high voltage until the strobe lights up, and then it will deliver more current at a lower voltage to keep the light on to make it brighter with less energy. And I actually think he came to believe that he was the inventor. We all look back and we can have different memories. So I actually think he came to believe that he had told Max that's how strobe lights works, and that gave Max the idea. And because he was making that allegation, this was going to be very hard, because the only people who would know is Max and Tom, and now it's a total he said, she said. So Doug Clint, our general counsel, actually came up with a brilliant strategy, which was this. Rather than argue over inventorship, we filed a lawsuit against our own attorney, saying that, look, to the patent courts, even if you accept that he was the inventor, he harbored a conflict of interest against us, his client, for years, and then sprung this trap. And therefore, even if he is the inventor, you should assign us as our damages, you should assign us all right, title, and interest in the patent. And ultimately, that strategy won. And so today, that patent is still on the walls at Axon, and it has Tom Watkins listed as the inventor which still irks Max, but
Right.
we own it. It was assigned to us as damages.
I'm going to take a picture of that patent on the wall at headquarters. I'll drop it in the show notes when we release this episode. First of all, Rick, we could have done a whole episode just on that little piece of the story. I can't believe that's happening when all this other stuff is going on.
Yeah. By the way, one other thing I want to share is when we were doing our research to fight our own patent attorney, like we were looking for case law on this, and there is almost none because it is a core tenet of patent law, like a core belief. Patent lawyers cannot assert an inventorship in their client's patents. Because think about it, like Mike, if you're my patent attorney and I'm describing an invention to you, you're going to have ideas too. So every time you're talking to your patent attorney, they're like, well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And so to avoid a conflict of interest, the very nature of patent attorneys is, look, you're paid to help people think through their inventions and write patent disclosures. You can't be an inventor. And yet it is such an obvious thing that there was no case law on it because nobody had done something this brazen as blatantly violating that tenet.
Well, I've known you. I'm glad you did not settle. And it's just what you said too. Like when it just doesn't feel right, like you fight it. I'm sure we're going to talk about some other battles that the company has fought over the years. But like I'm glad that the board agreed with you and did not settle this thing.
Yeah. Yes, we will come back to that. That has been a principle that has served us well. When the fundamentally right thing to do is to fight it. We've done it, and it is, to date, always worked out. All right, so let's go back now. I think it was that Friday. So I'm coming back from lunch. The stock is cratering. I've now had this confrontation in our parking lot with our own patent attorney who tells us he wants $10 million or he's going to take our key patent. Like, this can't get any worse, right? This just can't get any worse.
Mm-hmm.
So we bring in the investigators, and they start interviewing everybody in the company. And pretty quickly they come back to me and they go, Rick, we know who it is. I'm like, okay. Who is it? It's your personal assistant.
What?
And I'm like, oh my God, that can't be true. This lady's name was Pam. And we'd been, like when you have a personal assistant, you get pretty close.
Yeah.
I got to know her son, and I was thinking, oh my God, like 3 months ago, like she told me she had cancer, and she had come to the company asking if she could borrow $2,500. And I said, no, you can't borrow $2,500. We bonused her some extra money to help with her medical bills.
You gave it to her.
We gave it to her. And lo and behold, the investigators were like, oh yeah, about that. Nobody in the company has filed any claims for cancer in your medical insurance. You can't go look at any individual's records. That's HIPAA. But we can tell you that was a lie. That was a con game. Or we would later depose her and ask her why it is that she allegedly had cancer, but there were no medical records of her cancer. And she would say in a deposition years later, well, my insurance was in my married name and my medical records were in my maiden name, or, some BS excuse. And, it was just too much, so I didn't bother submitting for reimbursement on cancer therapy, which is obviously a load of crap.
Wow. I don't think I would tempt fate lying about cancer, first of all. So, but just for one second. So we're still in 2005. Is that correct?
We're in January
Mid-
2005, and now they're telling me one of my closest confidants, the woman who has had access to my email, answered my phone calls, opened my mail, basically, and not just for me, we were a small, scrappy company back then. I had never had a personal assistant before, and we shared Pam across multiple people. Me, the CEO, my brother, I think he was president at the time, my dad, the chairman of the board, and our general counsel. So if you were a mole for a short seller, this is like the ultimate gold mine. You get access to the entire C-suite. So in retrospect, we look like total schmucks. And now if I wind back the clock, when we first hired for this role, it was about March or April of 2004, right as those first negative short attacks were hitting, the negative news stories from Wyatt Andrews. That's when I realized I was getting overwhelmed, making my own airplane reservations and all that kind of stuff. And so that's when I decided, I need to finally get an assistant. And so Doug Clint, our general counsel, and I, we interviewed together because we were going to share this executive assistant. And I remember that this candidate, again, we won't give her last name, but when Pam came in the interview, she said stuff that was just a little over the top, like, I've been watching this company, I'll mop the floors, I will do whatever it takes, I just want to be part of this. If you bring me in, again, I'll mop the floors, I'll do anything to be part of this company. And I remember after the interview, Doug and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, wow, that was almost kind of stalkerish. It was like, a little bit much. So we kept interviewing. And look, we were super busy. The company was growing like crazy. We made an offer to another person who then told us she'd taken another job. And I remember at the time we were like, you know what? Let's just go with the enthusiastic lady. At least, she seems really excited about the job. Well, yeah, she was excited. Our instincts were right. I think, in retrospect, I believe she recruited in specifically in order to get access, to all their company files, which ultimately then started showing up, at the New York Times, and there were altered documents left behind. So now the interesting question is, well, how did they catch her? Because again, I'm a skeptic. I'm like, it can't be her. It can't be this friend of mine. That can't be right. Yeah. So do you know how they caught her?
No, but I know that's your mentality. I mean, I just know you, like you fundamentally believe in people. You have a kind heart. Like you don't have a mean bone in your body. So you're probably like, there's no way it can't be her. So now I'm like, what happened next? Like, how did they catch her?
So here's how they caught her. So again, we had a pretty small front office. And so the investigators went around, they noticed that all the guys, me, Doug, my dad, Tom, the 4 guys that she was working for, we would all open mail with our thumbs. So, the envelope would be all ripped up. Pam used a letter opener, so it would always have a nice, neat cut. Wow. And when they first confronted her about, hey, did you see the SEC letter telling us that the company was under investigation? Because when it came in on December 24th by fax, my brother took it and filed it away, so we didn't want that sitting on the fax machine.
Right.
But there was a hard copy that had shown up. And she said, oh, no, I never saw that. And then they basically pulled out the letter and they said, well, we noticed it was opened with a letter opener and you're the only one in the office who uses a letter opener. And at that moment, she reaches into her pocket and she pulls out a resignation letter she had prepared. It basically said, I resign, and she walked out the door. Now, we didn't have any power to arrest her or anything else.
Right.
But it was pretty clear, the minute she was made, she was gone.
She was ready. And
I never saw her again.
She walked out the door, and you guys are like walking.
I mean, she did end up filing an affidavit against us in a lawsuit years later. And this was where, basically, once that SEC investigation hit, we got flooded with lawsuits. And in one of them, she would later come back and say that, the company was shredding. There were so many documents we had to bring in a truck to deal with all the shredded documents that we had documenting people that were injured and killed by tasers, which was such an over-the-top claim. Think about how many documents you'd have to like bring in a truck. That testimony ended up getting thrown out. But it was then pretty clear that she had a pretty hostile agenda against the company. All right, so now let's come back to it's like January 2025. Our patent attorneys turned against us. Now, I think this was right about the time I found out my executive aid assistant was, apparently a mole working for short sellers. And by the way, there were some the investigators.
January 2005. You just said 25. 2005.
Yeah. 2000.
Let me just
20 years ago.
So, all of this went down that you just described essentially in 1 month. You got the letter from the SEC on Christmas Eve. The thing with your executive assistant and the patent lawyer, is that all happening like within that short time
Within
frame?
weeks. Within weeks. And by the way, I think
Oh.
the stock hit an all-time high on December 31st, which at the time was like $32 or something. And that's when my dad retired. And so one of the bright humor spots in all this was my dad for the next few years while the company was struggling for its survival was like, hey, everything was fine when I was there. Stock was at all-time high the day I retired, and I leave and it goes to shit.
And I told you had a mole, but you didn't believe me.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I heard that one. All right. So now we're in January 2005, and stock's down, and the fax machine is lighting up with lawsuits. We are getting hit over and over. And again, we hired Wilson Sonsini, which is one of the top Silicon Valley firms that defends some of the best tech companies in the world. And I believe at the time we set the record for the most shareholder lawsuits against any client of Wilson Sonsini. So let me explain how shareholder lawsuits work. This is totally messed up and a huge flaw in the American legal system. So the way a shareholder lawsuit works is a law firm will go find a shareholder that lost money. And then they will file a lawsuit against the company on behalf of that shareholder. And then they'll try to get what's called a class action, where they say, we're going to sue on behalf of all the shareholders against the company. And what the damages is the amount the stock dropped. Now, think about how ridiculous this is. The shareholders own the company. And then the shareholders sue the company. And if they win, the company has to pay damages, basically taking assets that are owned by the shareholders and give them to the shareholders, but through an attorney who's going to take a huge fee, like a third or half of it. So in my mind, this is like my leg suing my head. This is crazy. But the one minor twist is these are like yesterday's shareholders suing today's shareholders, because they basically say, well, they're suing management, but management just runs the company. The assets are owned by the shareholders. And this is the most corrupt thing in the American economy, in my belief, because
You just have to.
Go ahead.
You don't have to be a major shareholder. You can be a shareholder.
yeah, they typically find, somebody that owns like 50 shares, and a lot of the times these shareholders will be plants. They'll be people that just go buy a few shares that have a relationship with these law firms, just so that they can go and sue against the company. Now, as these are coming in, one after another. First, we're getting hit with, and I think it was over 100 different shareholder lawsuits, and these are coming in a matter of hours to days. Now, you don't put together a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, in a couple hours.
No.
And so what is clear is there's a relationship between the attorneys who do these shareholder lawsuits and short sellers, right? If you think about it, it's an alignment of interest. Everybody wins if the stock price goes down. The shorts make money because they already sold the shares. When it goes down, they buy it back cheaper. And if you can drive a company out of business, that's the best. If the stock goes to zero, the short sellers make 100% profit. The shareholder litigants, they're going to end up getting paid by the company and by the company's insurance, because every company has to have insurance for their directors and officers against these sorts of claims. And then the third sort of piece is, in both of these actually can have a beneficial relationship with the SEC, because the investigators at the SEC, right? This becomes like an army of lawyers and investigators and publicists helping you do your work. Now, I'm not,
You do your job.
I'm not alleging that that's like, it's just icky, I would say, right? But if you're an investigator, like, hey, you want this help. And look, sometimes they get it right and they find companies like Enron, but then sometimes they get it wrong. And it's like everybody at the SEC just, kind of moves on, like, oh, okay, well, turns out that was not a bad company. Meanwhile, there's a ton of damage being done to companies like us, who ultimately, as you know, today we survived this investigation and went on to thrive. But it was insanely painful.
Now, at the time when the fax machine just going crazy with 100+ lawsuits, shareholder lawsuits coming in, did you know, like, right away that this is a coordinated attack? This was not just random shareholders suing the company.
Yes, at that point it was obvious. People had been working on this for months. And now look, part of it we were a natural target. We were on everybody's radar because we had been so controversial. I looked it up actually this morning. At the beginning of 2004, our stock price was $7.08. At the end of 2004, it was $31.65. So we were up 350% in 2004. So if you were shorting our stock in 04,
You're hurting.
you were hurting bad. Like, let's say you shorted $100 million of TASER stock, which one of these hedge funds may have done. You could have lost $350 million for your $100 million bet, 3.5 times your loss. So, yeah, this is now, and we actually did hear that one short hedge fund went out of business from shorting TASER in 2004. But you get to the end of the year, and now I think I shared, we were the #1 performing stock in the world on December 31st, 2004. But we didn't even know that because those rankings didn't come out till 4 months later. And by then, January 2005 had happened, and we'd been crushed with all this litigation, et cetera. So the shorts in this case did get the last laugh. Now, there's one other thing that plays into all this timing. The end of December 2004.
They got the last. I mean, when you say they got the last laugh, because some people might not understand, they got there because stock plummeted, and then they sold the shares back, so they did not lose their shirt, so to speak. So they actually came out ahead because the stock tanked after that.
Yeah, they ultimately got us. And I would say what was really disappointing about this, our shareholder base back then was very retail heavy. You know, my dad used to take every shareholder call, like even individuals. We can't afford to do that now at the size we're at. But it was, and my dad was a passionate guy, but I remember he talked to me. He talked to farmers and teachers and individual police officers that owned our shares that would call in, and my dad would talk to all of them. And I can tell you, these people were pissed, and some of them got wiped out. In fact, there was one shareholder that broke my heart. His name was Chester. And Chester used to follow us on the message boards. He was, I believe, a teacher who was engaging in very high-risk trading. He was trading options on TASER stock. And if you know about option trading, it's super high risk. You can lose everything. But I believe he took something like $50,000 or $100,000 and turned it into $50 to $100 million. And that sounds crazy at first, but we used to talk to him because he was out on the Yahoo message boards. He had financial models of our business that were frankly better than we had. We were too busy growing to actually be modeling our business to the degree of resolution. Right. That was his full-time job. And he quit his job as a teacher. And I remember he sent us a picture. He bought a yacht down in Mexico. He bought a mansion in Cleveland. And I remember talking to him at our shareholder meeting in mid-2004. And I said, hey, Chester, I'm not supposed to give you stock advice because I'm the CEO. But for God's sake, please take some off the table. Like, what you're doing is super risky. I'm so glad it worked out.
Yeah.
But please, don't, like, the difference between $50 million and $500 million is not that big a difference. It's going from 50 million to zero. Right. And so guess what happened to Chester?
I already know. Down to zero.
He went to zero. I remember I went to visit him later at he'd bought this old railroad magnate mansion in Cleveland, Ohio. I didn't know this because Cleveland was where a lot of the railroad, millionaires of the turn of the last century built their mansions. And he bought one of them. It was a spectacular mansion. But I went to visit him after everything had crashed, and there was no furniture. We were sleeping on cots.
Wow.
And he ultimately lost the place. But he had lost all his money before he had one more turn, and he was going to punch out, or so he told me. And it just broke my heart. He lost everything and got wiped out. Anyway, that's what these short sellers did. They reached into the pockets of cops and teachers. And I remember my dad took a call from a farmer who'd mortgaged his farm to buy TASER. We were a bit of a meme stock back in 2004, 2003. I mean, the stock was running like crazy, and people were doing irresponsibly high-risk things because a lot of people were making a lot of money. And by the way, my dad would give people the same advice. He'd always be like, hey, we appreciate your support, but be careful. Like, the stock moves around a lot. And I think that farmer got wiped out.
Well, knowing the stories you've told about your dad, who was quite the risk taker as well, that's pretty sage advice if he's telling you, like, be careful.
Yep.
Did you,
Okay.
did you talk to Chester? Have you talked to him lately? Like, years have gone by, heard from him?
I haven't. You know what, Chester? If you're out there and you see the podcast, please reach out. I'd love to catch up. It'd be great to talk to you again. But yeah,
Right, but just pause again. So, there is so much here. Just the Chester story alone of a teacher who was trading high risk in options, but makes enough to buy a yacht and mansions, like all of this, and it goes down to zero. Like that is incredible by itself, Rick.
yeah, it really was.
And you're right. I like what you were a meme stock before there was such a thing as a meme stock.
Yes, yeah, I'd say we were. All right, so now let's go back to January 2005.
It's a lot.
So we now know we've got a mole inside the company. Now, I don't know if you remember Martha Stewart. You know, she got convicted of insider trading. Insider trading is when you're trading on information you're not supposed to have. Now, most times people get it. It's like a random tip. They overhear something. In this case, we had insider information being trafficked out of TASER, right? That $2 million order was a material order. That was a big part of our revenue at the time. And that is a definition of what they call material non-public information. That's why I, as the CEO, can't trade at the end of a quarter because I know what the big orders were. Until we announce them publicly, I can't trade. But we had people not just trading on random tips. We had people intentionally stealing material non-public information, like this purchase order, sending it to traders who will then make trades in our stock, who then send that information to the New York Times to try to manipulate the stock. And so I went to our attorneys and I said, look, we have got to go to the SEC and tell them about this so that they can see what's been happening to us. And our lawyers, guess what they said?
No.
Yes, it was a no. And it was good advice. They said, look, you will never win anything with the SEC. You just don't complicate this. Our goal is to get this over as fast as possible. If you complicate this with a bunch of drama and new angles for them to investigate, it'll drag it out. And the longer this drags out, like, look, you may go out of business because your customers are not buying. You got to get this investigation over. Now, I couldn't accept that. I was like, I just can't accept that we're not going to do something about this. So instead, we put together a binder, and Doug Clint, our general counsel, and I flew to New York, and we met with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. So we basically went to a different investigative agency because we didn't want to get the SEC spun up. We wanted them to just conclude their investigation against us. But we basically went to them and we said, hey, look, guys, like this is not just casual insider trading. You've got people intentionally trafficking in documents, modifying documents left behind, setting traps for management. Meanwhile, our stock price is down, over $1 billion of lost value.
So you fly with Doug with a binder to see the federal prosecutor. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah, and long story short, they said it was really interesting, but nothing ever happened. And Doug's and the other lawyers' feedback to me is like, look, nobody gets famous busting a secretary.
Right.
It just didn't make the cut list apparently of folks they would take the time to go after. So nothing.
What were you hoping? Like,
I wanted justice.
Them all up?
I wanted them to figure out, like we tried to figure out, by the way, there was records on our corporate fax machine in the evenings. Documents were being faxed to a mysterious New York number. We tried to figure out who owned that number, and we couldn't. And we tried. So that's how we believe information was going, from late at night when we thought our executive assistant was working overtime. Yeah, she was working overtime, all right.
Yeah.
Going through everything and sending some to these people who were shorting our stock. We could never figure out who it was. I'd always hoped that a government agency would be able to punch through and get the records and figure out, track down who was behind it all. And like when I talked with our lawyers, they said, look, if a hedge fund is behind this, these guys are very smart. They do this for a living. You know, you are not going to ever be able to track the money. Some of it's going to go through offshore accounts. Like, this is a fool's errand. I also wanted to file litigation against Pam, my executive assistant. And the lawyers as well said, hey, look, that's tilting at windmills. She's going to come across as a whistleblower. You'll get beat up in the news media. It simply is not going to help. Rick, you've got to hunker down, run the company, get this investigation done, and move on. And you're never going to figure out who did this to you, who is really behind this. All right, so in terms of getting the investigation done, I said, okay, great. Here's what I'd like to do. I want to go meet with the SEC and give them all the information they need to complete their investigation.
Are you going to ask me what I think the lawyer said to that?
Yeah. What do you think they said, Mike?
No.
Yeah. Lawyers have a habit of doing that. And did we talk about this in a previous episode?
No.
Yeah, I don't think we did. Yeah. So the lawyer said, look, that is crazy talk.
Right, because that's right. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're going to say it. This is crazy talk. You don't go meet if you're under an investigation. You don't go knock on the door like, hey, can we talk?
Exactly. They're like, nobody gives voluntary testimony to the SEC. And that's because the lawyers are trying to protect you, right? They're like, look, we have to be very careful in every question they answer and how we craft it, right? They're used to defending. Look, some of the people lawyers defend are guilty, and they want to protect you from incriminating yourself. And I said, look, I appreciate that's good legal advice, but we will not survive if this goes on too long. So I want you to set up a meeting with the SEC. And so they did. And we walked into the SEC offices in San Francisco with boxes of documents. And I thunked it down on the table and I said, look, you might believe we're crazy because every one of us has been hit with a taser, but we're not liars. We didn't lie about the safety. We've all been hit with it ourselves. So have some of our adult children and our board members. What do you want to know? And then they'd ask questions. Well, what about the effects of taser on cocaine? All right, here's a study from the Cleveland Clinic. And the thing that saved us is we had been so transparent. Anytime we made claims about taser safety, we would publish the underlying studies that we were relying on. In fact, if anything, we were guilty of copyright infringement because we didn't always have the permission to publish those studies. But we were extremely transparent. And that is what saved us.
And that's what Dr. Mark Kroll said in episode 9. Like, he gave the company credit for being overly transparent with all the studies.
Yeah,
and not holding back on anything.
Or like when Jeff Ho talked about with that one research study many years later, where we did see a minor cardiac, a flutter in the heartbeat during the taser. It created what we call capture, where the heart started to follow the taser pulse. We didn't have to disclose that because we never released that product. That was a prototype. We went back, we re-engineered it, tested it again, and we didn't see that issue. But as my dad said, bad news never gets better with time. Like, if you don't, nobody expects you to be perfect, but they expect you to be honest. So if you have a problem, disclose it as fast as possible and deal with it. And people say, well, okay, they dealt with it. But if you sit on something and then a decade later it comes out, well, now it's like, hey, you didn't disclose this. You hid the ball. You were dishonest by not disclosing. And so that philosophy, I don't believe the company would have survived if we didn't have that philosophy, because we were under so much scrutiny that had we hidden anything. And by the way, when the SEC comes to do an investigation, they don't be like, hey, produce some documents for us. They take a copy of your email server. Thank you very much. We'll look through it and decide what we think is relevant. So there's no hiding anything.
I didn't know your father, but now just through we're on episode 13. Like, we're gonna have to put together a compendium of his advice and his wisdom, because like every significant step along the way, like, he's given some pretty damn good advice, not just for Taser, but like for business in general.
I love that. Let's do that. Let's do a tribute episode to my dad one of these days. Mm-hmm. All right, but let's come back and let's wrap up with the SEC punchline. Yep. We went and we visited them. It was like a 4-hour meeting, And on the way out, the lawyers were high-fiving us. They were like, we just cut that investigation by years.
Wow.
And it was, I believe, about a year until the SEC wrapped their investigation with no findings, which is as good as it gets. They don't give you a gold star or a happy face sticker
Right.
like in elementary school. As good as it gets is no findings, we're closing it down and we're moving on.
Wow. That's crazy.
Now, there's one more thread I think I want to finish up before we wrap this episode,
All right.
and that was the share. Yeah.
And when, maybe, so when is the SEC meeting? When did you guys go in?
That
to
would
the
have been
SEC? Do you remember?
probably February or March of 2005, a couple months in.
I mean, looking back now, in the 30 plus years of the company, I mean, that, 60-day, 90-day period, is that the craziest that
I would
has ever
say-
been?
I would say it was a year. All of 2005 was terrifying and miserable because we didn't know if we were going to end up bankrupt. Like, was the company going to go under? Were we going to end up in jail? Like, when you're under federal investigation, you just don't know what's going to happen. It is terrifying. And we were getting death threats. I moved my family into a gated community, and I bought the house, through, let's just say, not in my name, because, well, look, we had people, as I mentioned, we had lots of individual investors, some of whom put their life savings into the stock, and now they're reading, management lied, they're under an investigation,
Right.
the stock is down. People blamed us, and
Yeah.
they were threatening to kill me, and other executives. It was a terrifying year. I had to hide my family. Even I remember Doug Clint's wife. There was so much negative news on the front page of every newspaper that Doug came in one day, he said, my own wife has lost faith. Like, she's asking if
wow.
these tasers are killing people. It's like, this is bad. So there's one piece I want to wrap up because I think we should do it now and not save it for a future episode. And that was the shareholder lawsuits. So I think it was about a year until the SEC investigation was wrapped up. And once it was done, now we had, all these shareholder lawsuits get consolidated into one lawsuit. And we had to go to mediation. And I remember going into the mediation, and the shareholder attorneys against us looked like clowns. They came in, and you have to explain your case to the mediator. And they were just saying ridiculous stuff like, oh, well, the taser is dangerous, and they lied about the safety, and blah, blah, blah. And I would pull out the studies. Oh, wait a minute. No, you want to talk about effects with taser and cocaine? That was one of the allegations that made it dangerous. Here's a study from the Cleveland Clinic, nation's top heart hospital, on exactly this subject, showing it's not an issue. And we went through, and by the end, after you present your case, we went to our separate rooms. And I was kind of cocky. I remember looking at the lawyers like, well, shit, this is over. Those guys look like idiots. Like, they didn't know what they were talking about. We crushed every argument they made. And that's when my attorney said, Rick, I want you to sit down. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, you're going to settle this case. I said, bullshit, we are not going to settle this case. These guys are full of shit. We've been cleared by the SEC. Okay, Rick, let me explain how this works. These guys are going to clear the hurdle to begin discovery. Because you've been on every front page of every newspaper, there's no way the judge throws this out without allowing it to go to discovery. Now, remember how your customers stopped buying because they were freaked out by a few newspaper headlines? Imagine how they're going to feel after an 8-hour deposition, because these guys will go to all of your top customers, and for 8 hours, they are going to pound them. Did you know this? Did you know that about Taser? They are going to reinforce every negative allegation against you, and they're going to find some nasty emails that are going to make you guys look bad. We don't know which ones they are, but every company's got them. Somebody who's having a bad day might have said, like, I can't sell this shit, or, something that could be read to mean that you had a quality problem or a sales problem or something. And they said
100%.
all these guys need is one or two emails out of your entire company that make you look like a-holes. And first thing they're going to do is they're going to go poison the well with all of your customers. by making all these allegations in an 8-hour deposition that's going to be very uncomfortable for your customers. So your sales will drop more than just from some bad newspaper headlines about an investigation. It will cost you north of $20 million to defend this case, because these things are like nuclear war. They will run up your bill, because that's part of the incentive to settle these things. And where this will all end up is they're going to put you in front of a jury. And here's how this is going to go. People in a jury, Rick, are not people like you who've had a lot of financial success. They typically are very busy and find ways to get out of jury duty. So if you're lucky, you have people in the jury that, have a job, but they're working hard paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And you might have a lot of people that don't have a job. And so there's going to be some natural resentment because you've made a lot of money. And these lawyers are going to get up, and it's going to turn into, look, a lot of trials are emotion. They're going to paint you as an asshole who made a lot of money, who lied about the safety of the product. And it's going to come down to, does the jury believe you or does it believe them? And if they believe you're an asshole, Rick, by nature, these shareholder suits claim fraud of management. If they convince a jury to convict that management committed fraud, that means they will punch through the corporate veil, because normally as an officer of a corporation, right, the company pays any damages. But if you are convicted of fraud, now you're personally on the hook.
Yeah.
And so, if you go to war on this, Rick, it will cost you more to litigate than to settle. And if this litigates, there's a 50-50 chance you win or lose, because litigation's never a sure thing. If you lose, here's what that looks like. All of management, you will individually get wiped out because the damages are greater than your net worth. I mean, the damages in this case were more than half, because the stock of the company dropped by more than half. The damages were greater than the remaining value of the company. And so if they win, you will lose everything. Tom will lose everything. Your dad will lose everything. And the company will be owned by the plaintiffs. Because the damages are bigger, you will have to basically turn over the company to these people. And I remember sitting down, feeling the blood flush out of my head. Oh my God. And they then explained, don't feel bad, Rick. 100% of these cases settle. Nobody, once management understands this is an inherently, frankly, corrupt system.
Right.
Because basically you're putting management in a position where it's like, hey, you can take some of the company's money to make this problem go away. Or if you don't, all of you are personally on the hook, and the company. And so we swallowed our pride. That was the only significant payment we ever made. I think it was $22 million, and it still sticks in my craw because it was the wrong thing to do from my ethics perspective. But
and we know where the $22 million, the majority of that went to.
Went to these fucking attorneys. And these guys were just gross. They were just greasy. You could tell they did not give two shits about TASER safety or anything else. And as part of the settlement, A, you have to write them a big check. And then B, you have to agree to make some changes to your corporate governance. And they give you a list of like 20 things. They're like, here, pick 2 of these. They don't really care. But you've got to have some say. Like, I think we then created a lead independent director position and did some other stuff. That to this day was one of the ickiest moments of my career, agreeing to pay these ambulance chasing schmucks who had no case against us, because the alternative, as it was laid out, was a nuclear Armageddon that wasn't going to be based on the facts. It was going to be potentially based on, greed, envy, and mudslinging. And so
I would also point out this might be one of the few times in your career you actually took the advice of your lawyers.
Well, I like to think that I'm not crazy.
No,
in this case, it was.
You are crazy. I mean, that for sure is true in terms of like wild ideas, and we've talked about that, and we've talked about some more. But no, when you believe in something, you fight for it. If it is the right thing to do, like you're going to fight for it. And I know I can't wait to that. Well, actually, when we get to that, it's going to take multiple episodes to explain how you followed all the way up to the Supreme Court. But if you believe in something, you fight for it.
Yeah, and what maybe in one of our next episodes, we're going to talk about the long tail of litigation, because the shareholder litigation was the most expensive I've ever been through, but it was only one of what has now been, I think, almost 400 cases against the company. So in late 2004, we had 0 lawsuits against the company. And by 2005, we had hundreds of lawsuits against the company. Our legal bill went from 0 to a huge part of our budget. And in fact, last year I want to make a tribute to Doug Clint. Doug Clint, this company would not be here except for Doug Clint. Doug was our general counsel. And I remember we went public in 2001. And in 2002, Doug reached out to my dad. He was my dad's general counsel at one of his companies. And I remember my dad saying, hey, we should hire this guy. And Tom and I were like, why do we need a general counsel? Like, this is 2002, right? This is before our big growth phase. And my dad was like, I used to wonder why we needed a general counsel. In fact, when my dad joined the company to be CEO, where Doug was the general counsel, he called Doug in to fire him because he didn't think they needed a general counsel. Wow. And it was a funny story. He said that's how they met. And then he ended up keeping Doug. And he said, look, Rick, you'll pay more. Doug will save you more in outside fees. Even as a tiny company, it's worth it. And thank God Doug Clint came aboard, because without him, we never would have survived this raft of litigation that hit. Because we, in addition to the SEC, in addition to the shareholder suit, we got pummeled with everybody who's ever been hit by a taser by police started suing us and police. And that alone also should have killed the company. But Doug built an in-house litigation machine to defend us. Mm-hmm. And to this day, that is one of our key core competencies, is we have one of the best. We run an in-house law firm that's one of the best in the country. And so Doug has since passed away. So Doug, tribute to you. One of the most wonderful human beings I've ever met. Looked like one of the Beach Boys and had the nicest disposition. But when he turned on, we called him Cool Hand Luke. When he looked at you with his steel blue eyes and you were on the wrong side of our lawyer, you had it coming. Doug was just an amazing person, and it's so sad the world lost him. But he saved us.
Passed away a few years ago. I remember I just started with the company. Only aboard a couple of years. Might have been the first year or two. And we were in Hawaii, and Doug is in a hot tub. And Doug's a big guy, bigger than I am. And he goes, and he sees me, and I didn't know Doug that well. I'm new to the company. I'm still trying to figure things out. But he goes, Mike, come over here. And I'm like, okay. So I walk over to the hot tub. He goes, no, get in. So I get in the hot tub and then end up sitting right beside Doug in this hot tub in Hawaii and just having the best conversation. Just the nicest guy. And that meant that conversation, as being sort of new to the company, he was a big shot. I remember to this day. He was just a tremendous guy.
And the last thing I will say is Doug Clint was my idol as a father. I love my dad, but my dad was not a great father growing up. My dad was a workaholic. He was not very engaged. My relationship with my own father really flourished once I started the business. We became great friends later in life. But Doug Clint, in addition to being the most badass general counsel the world has ever seen, was the best father I've ever seen. He had this amazing family, beautiful kids. And he was working around the clock with me, but then he would punch out and he would go be an engaged father who's always there for his kids. And when we talk about Boldly Go, when I launched that as a new value at Axon this year, Doug Clint was one of those inspirations. It's work hard, but live a good life too. Like, don't leave your family behind. Don't get your priorities out of whack. Work hard, play hard, and be the best human you can be in all dimensions.
Well, I think this is probably a good place to punch out, because as I mentioned, are here on Bald Head Island, right off the coast of North Carolina. This is actually a maritime forest behind me. But as soon as we end this podcast, I'm going that direction with my family, and we will spend the rest of the afternoon. It's July. We're in the middle of the summer, and we will spend the rest of the afternoon together as a family on the beach. And I am sure, looking behind you, you have some plans with your family as well.
Yes, I do. And with that, thanks everybody for tuning in. Boldly go do something great with your families. this weekend, and we'll be back in another week to keep telling our story.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.